Welcome to the Inside Story. I'm Billy Hallowell, and on today's show, we are diving into Donald Trump and some of the interesting comments he has made about heaven recently. I'm joined by the Christian Post's John Brown. How you doing today?
I'm well, Billy. Good to be with you.
All right, so let's just dig into this. It's a little bit of a loaded story because there are a number of different occasions where this has happened, but this I'm referring to is Donald Trump, the president, speaking about heaven. He's made a number of comments that have caused concern among some Christians. Why are those comments making headlines, and what exactly did he say?
So, as you said, Trump's been talking a lot about heaven in recent months. This was even before Charlie Kirk's death. But he originally in August mentioned he thought maybe ending the war in Ukraine could get him into heaven. And then he was asked to follow up earlier this month on his way to Israel to sign the peace deal there. And he sort of expressed concerns that he won't get into heaven at all. And so I think a lot of people are concerned, as you said, because what does he believe? And if he does believe that he can get into heaven, does he think he's going to earn his way there? And it's almost as if he's falling into despair about it. But it's caused a lot of conversation.
Yeah, it certainly has. And I think one of the things that is missed a little bit in some of that conversation, is that, yes, you want to make sure that somebody has proper theological framing. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, he has terrible people around him that aren't giving him the gospel. But I do know for a fact he's heard the gospel from people and that he's heard an accurate depiction of the gospel. And you can't control how people are going to react to that. But I think on the flip side of that, you also have the fact that he is speaking about these things. They're clearly top of mind for him in these moments. And I think that's actually an opportunity for somebody to maybe understand these themes a little bit deeper. And so it's a moment to maybe be praying for Christians to be praying for the president in that regard, that he will gain understanding on what exactly this all means. Now, how did faith leaders react to Trump's statements that he's maybe not heaven bound, in particular that statement?
Right. So that was the pull quote, as you said. A lot of people, a lot of Christians on social media are concerned, as I said, and they're concerned that he might think that he can still get to heaven, and that's very frustrating for a lot of them because, again, as you said, Trump has a lot of people around him who have told him the gospel. Jenna Ellis, in particular, she's a very devout Christian. She used to be his attorney. She said that's heartbreaking if he means it, is what she said, and she's frustrated because she feels that Trump's making it very difficult for Christians to defend his worldview on God and truth. And she reiterated that there isn't anything that is going to get him into heaven. It's not by works, it's not by peace deals. He could end every war in the world, and it's still not going to be enough because we're all sinners. And so she expressed hope that he would become born again. She was a big follower of John MacArthur, and so that was something that he really emphasized. And then Sean Feucht, he's an evangelist who's also a big Trump supporter. He expressed optimism that Trump is starting to show humility, or at least trying to in his own way. And he said he thinks it's amazing that he's finally acknowledging now that his works alone, all his wealth, all his fame, are not good enough. And you have to remember Trump in 2015, 10 years ago, he said, I don't think I've ever asked God for forgiveness. So Sean and others are asking that people would just pray that God would still move in his heart, which it appears might be happening.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, and I know others have spoken out as well. Pastor Doug Wilson put together an open letter. What warning did Doug Wilson give to Trump in that open letter, specifically about the limits of political power and earthly success?
Wilson's letter was great, and anyone who's not familiar with him should really look him up. He just planted a church here in D.C. Pete Hegseth goes there, so he's getting more influential in the administration. But in his letter, he brought up this really great story from antiquity about the Greek philosopher Diogenes, and he was legendary during the time of Alexander the Great. He was one of the Cynic philosophers, is what they called them. That's where we get that word. And they totally rejected materialism. He actually lived in a barrel, Diogenes. So anyway, Alexander came and met Diogenes one day, and he offered him anything he wanted, and he just asked if he could move because he was blocking his sunlight, which was just totally dismissing everything that Alexander the Great had done. He also said he couldn't discern Alexander's father's bones from dead bones from that of a slave. And it's a funny story, but I think it showed that the ancients, they got to a point where right before Christ, they were realizing the futility of their system. and they reached the end of what man's wisdom can achieve, and it left them cynics, so to speak. But in a way that really paved the way for the gospel, for that whole world to receive the gospel. And Trump is an Alexander, but I think he has a lot in common with him. Trump has achieved pretty much anything, everything someone could hope for in terms of this world, but it's never enough. His granddaughter asked him recently what dreams he hasn't achieved yet, and he said, "Well, my next dream is just to be considered a great president." And so Wilson's point was that Trump's legacy, no matter what, it's going to fade someday. And so he urged him to put his value in eternity and to seek God's forgiveness through the gospel.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point, right? Wilson was emphasizing salvation, how a person can receive forgiveness from God. At the end of the day, whether you're a president or you're anyone else, it doesn't really matter. We're all human beings and we're all the same in God's eyes, and we're all going to die, and we have to make a decision before we die on whether we're going to accept Christ or not. And that's the most important decision anybody can make. Being a president doesn't make you immune to that. So the fact that Wilson emphasized that, I think, is incredibly important and powerful. Because look, when you have fame, when you have money, when you have success, it's very easy to lose your way on these things or to not understand what really matters. So that's an important message. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit because White House Faith Director Jenny Korn, she had an interesting interpretation of Trump's comments. What did she say they revealed about his character?
Right, so she helps run the faith office there at the White House, and she assured the public that he was his comments were evidence of a growing humility in his heart, and he was just trying to express that in his own way. Her direct quote, I think, was, "The president has his own language," and that, how she looks at it, she says, "I know how he talks." This was him expressing humility. And so, again, she's expressing hope, the same hope that some other people like Sean were expressing.
Yeah, and I think that that is interesting, right? Because there is an element of this of humility when you're saying, "I don't know if I'll make it to heaven." Even if you're joking, you're saying it tongue in cheek. Why else would you bring it up? It's again, it's top of mind. There's something about this subject matter that he's thinking about. And let's be honest, we're coming off of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a close ally of Trump. You also have two assassination attempts on President Trump that unfolded, obviously, before the election. So this is something that I would imagine he has thought a lot about and that it is top of mind for him. But what broader questions about faith and politics do you think these stories raise for believers who are watching Trump's continued influence in public life? They're seeing how influential he is, and they're watching the debate around this. What are those broader questions you think emerge from this?
I think this question is relevant because these are questions that apply to everyone. These are not just political issues. They extend into politics. We're in such a spiritual war that they're now bubbling up to the political realm, which is, the top of society. But these are things that everyone has to deal with. These are human issues. And it just reminds me of King Solomon in so many ways. He had more than any king has ever had. But if you read Ecclesiastes, he came to realize that it didn't satisfy him. And I think that we call him the wisest man to live. I think that was the ultimate wisdom. He said, all that matters is fearing God and keeping his commandments. And I think that's important for everyone to remember, whether they're in politics or not. And I hope Trump ultimately comes to understand that.
Yeah, no, it's again the most important thing that most important decision that anybody can make is whether or not they're going to accept Jesus. And I think the fact that we're even having this conversation right now is really important. It's important for people listening to make a decision themselves and to ask that question. Trump is saying all these things about heaven. Well, what do you believe about heaven? What do you believe about Jesus? It's we're here talking about a news story, but this is the most important thing, and it's really why the Christian Post does what the Christian Post does, right? And so I welcome you and appreciate you, breaking this story down with us today, John. It's truly an essential one.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Everyone else, make sure you tune in next week for another episode of The Inside Story. In the meantime, head on over to the Christian Post, christianpost.com, for all the news you need to read. We'll see you here again next week.